These are real encounters shared on Reddit. Strange moments, unsettling experiences, and stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Let's dive in.
Okay, I never really post anything on Reddit, mostly just reading, so please excuse me if I do or say anything that isn't common courtesy here. In around 2018-2019, I, 25F at the time was 18-19, was living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in NE, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, etc. Plus, his parents were super cool, and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, even though I was/am quite scared of the dark, so I would just not go outside after a certain time, because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you pass one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on. Right in front of me in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch-black road with thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3-4, a tall, slim woman, an average height-weight man, a child, short hair but couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing and couldn't see their face, maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a fucking stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered but not nice. They also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking, had music playing, etc. They didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all, at the same time, stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road and booking it the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of three reactions. They immediately think I'm fucking cuckoo, think I'm lying, or have had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me. Honestly, it was, and still is, the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery, assault, etc., or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option.
Hello all. This is my account of a very strange encounter I had in Grand Lake, CO, on June 14th, 2016, a date I can corroborate through old Facebook posts. I have only been driven to share it now because I very recently happened to learn about the 1984 Isidoro Ferry encounter while watching a random YouTube video, and what was described in that encounter was roughly exactly what I and the others with me had seen. So, on this particular day, me, my roommate at the time, my girlfriend at the time, and my girlfriend at the time's friend drove to Grand Lake, CO from Boulder, CO for an overnight camping trip. All four of us were 20 years old at the time. I suggested Grand Lake because it wasn't far. Plus, I was familiar with the area from having lived there for a while. As a kid, we drove up through Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park and ended up camping at what is now known as the Green Ridge Campground. That evening, definitely sometime after 10 o'clock p.m., but exactly when I'm not sure, we walked down a dirt road from the campsite to the area where Shadow Mountain Lake drains into the headwaters of the Colorado River. Here, at 40 G12, 26.3, N, 105 Dig50, 28.1 W. There was this incline that went down to where the river started, and we walked down there, roughly right about here, at 40 G25.0 N, 105 50 so 19.1 W. One thing I'd like to mention is that the area was significantly much more heavily wooded at the time, as it was completely ravaged by wildfires in 2020. None of us had a flashlight or anything like that, and it was incredibly dark, except for how the moon illuminated on the river when you'd look downstream. I remember that very specifically, because I also very specifically remember coming up to the river, looking downstream for a bridge, which would have been really weird to have been in this location to begin with, or a fallen tree or something that could be used as a crossing, neither of which I could see, and again did have a very good view of the river. The next thing I remember, we see from across the river what looks like a very tall person, maybe 6'5", maybe even 6'7", wearing a headlight. The light was particularly bright and clean looking, like a very clean looking white light. I'll also note that no humanoid figure was visible. It was just the light, though it basically appeared as if it was a humanoid with some light source on their head. I remember that it was briefly moving, then stopped and started staring at us. My roommate, who was drunk, also, for what it's worth, I was the only person there who did not consume alcohol. The girls had like 2 to 3 beers, and my roommate was trashed. Started calling out in a friendly way, like, "Hey, buddy!" The light just stayed there, without responding, but still very much seeming to be observing us. I don't remember how long it was staring at us, but it was extremely weird and uncomfortable. Eventually, it started moving downstream a bit. This is where everything started becoming extremely strange and honestly scary, because the light was moving in a very steady and fluid way, not bobbing up and down or something like you'd expect to see from a headlamp someone was wearing while walking across rough mountain terrain at night. And I mean very steady and fluidly. Then it disappeared. We were all weirded out by what had happened already, and we're talking about heading back, and then the next thing we see, the light is now on our side of the river. Still no shape or form of anything visible, just the light. I'd like to emphasize again how I looked downstream on the river, which was the only clearly visible part of the setting, for a crossing, and didn't see anything, including as far back as where the light appeared. I also looked at old satellite images on Google Maps, and there doesn't seem to ever be any evidence of a bridge being there, which again, there wouldn't have ever been a reason for one existing in the first place. Basically, it did not make sense how it could have crossed the river and reappeared like that. We all decided that was enough and walked back up the incline to the dirt road. Once we were back up there, we looked down the incline and saw the light still staring at us, much closer now, but still without any obvious figure shape other than just the light. My roommate started belligerently screaming obscenities at it, and then it just charged at us. The speed and way in which it moved was very non-human, as in, it was moving way too smoothly to have been just a headlamp. It also moved just a little too fast. Not impossibly fast, but just a little too fast to, seemingly, be human. We were all terrified and booked it the hell out of there. I was always a very gifted runner, so I ended up way ahead of everyone else. I looked back once and just saw the others running behind me, and nothing else after that. The girls were crying and locked themselves in the car once we got back to camp. My roommate went from fun, boisterous drunk to completely terrified and paranoid. He grabbed a hatchet and started telling me that it was alien technology and was trying to convince me to go back with him and investigate it. I had to talk him down from that and then eventually coax the girls out of car. We hung out outside for maybe another hour after that, kind of just not saying much. We went to sleep, woke up the next day, and drove back to Boulder. I was always skeptical about what happened, but my roommate and ex always said that something weird happened that night whenever it was brought up. My ex ended up having recurring dreams about it, and my roommate had a bit of a mental decline in the year that followed. It obviously ended up sticking with me as well, and in recent years, I have been less and less able to rationally explain it. I don't claim to know what it was, only that it wasn't normal, and it has stayed with me ever since.
To start, I've always been a believer. To think humans are alone is crazy. My mother saw crafts over her grandparents' farm in Mississippi in the 70s with her father. So I grew up hearing that story. Then in roughly 2011-12, I saw my own cluster individual lights in the sky that moved much too slowly to be regular aircrafts, then began turning at right angles. The usual works. So, needless to say, I had my proof and was content with that. Fast forward to 2 years ago, and I meet my fiancé. He opens up and tells me he's had multiple encounters since childhood. Completely convinced he's been taken over and over. To add, We are both autistic relevant, depending on who you ask. Of course, I believe he is telling the truth to the best of his ability. We both struggle with other paranormal occurrences, even to this day, so meh, why not? So one weekend we go visit his family and stay in his old room. The night was normal, nothing unusual, so we go to bed. His German Shepherd is in the room with us, asleep in the floor by the bed. The TV is on, volume on low but audible. The room is laid out like this. The door is recessed so you walk about 4 feet to the actual room itself. Dresser and TV on the left, bed in the center on the adjoining wall, and a closet in the corner close to the foot of the bed on right side of the room. In the middle of the night, I stir and slowly gain consciousness. He is on my right, closest to the TV and door, sound asleep. I realize there's staticky, underwater sound in the air and the TV is muffled, like the whole room was holding its breath. Plus, the dog was no awake and alert, totally unlike him. Something was not right. My skin and head are both tingling and I can't move. I open my eyes and the room is too dim, like a dark fog was over everything. I see a figure by my feet. It is so tall and thin, but I either couldn't see its face or was unable to simply lift my eyes that high. I am unsure at this point. I pan my eyes to the right, and in the doorway just behind the dull illumination of the television are 3 more figures looming into the room, merely observing. They had to be 6 to 7 feet tall, larger heads, skinny limbs and bodies. I could not make out features, other than a shadow where the eyes would be. I was alarmed, because who TF wouldn't be? But I knew I was not in danger. My heart was racing, but I was calm. I blinked over and over trying to clear my eyes, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But they just stood there for what felt like ages, until, in a moment, they vanished. The room brightened, the TV volume resumed, and could feel my partner breathing next to me again. I remember laying there for a while, pondering what had just happened. It took about a week to confess what I'd seen. Naturally, he calls his mom to tell her, and she says she'd heard a massive bang from the attic, only to find nothing disturbed. Weird, right? Months later, he is convinced he had been visited and taken one night again, but doesn't tell me until 2 days later, after he heard banging on our roof and in our attic again, just to find nothing. He is convinced they are all related, and I just have no idea. I can't find any stories similar to ours so far, so what do you guys think? Any insight?
This was Subliminal Tapes. If you found these